here. Okay, welcome everybody. We're just so pleased that you're joining us today. Great to see all of you. Like I said earlier, several of you are going to get a special cookie because you have perfect attendance at Coffees with Gina. You've come to all of them, and we sure appreciate that. We took a break last month, kind of because of the heat. Not really. We had a hard time getting things scheduled. So we missed seeing you last month, but we're getting these all scheduled for the balance of the calendar year. So if it's your first time to join us, we sure appreciate your being here, and look forward to seeing you in the future and staying up to date on things. Before we start, I want to be sure everybody is hearing me. So can you give me a thumbs up or a wave or something in the chat that you're hearing me okay? Okay, just your hearing aid. There we go. Okay, good. So what we do on these calls is we keep everybody muted because that often will bring in background noise that will compete with the presentation. So Joyce mutes everybody. As we go through the presentation, if you have any questions or any comments, you can wave. We're all watching. Yeah, so we have somebody asking for a phone number to call in. Could you provide that to Betsy, please? Okay, thank you. Okay, that's coming, Betsy. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll keep you muted so we don't get the background and the feedback. So, but if you have a question as we go through, you can either jot it down and ask at the end of Dave's presentation, or if you prefer, because sometimes I forget, you can wave to us and Joyce will unmute you so that you can ask your question and Dave will answer it, and we'll be sure to signal Dave on that too. So how secure are you feeling today? How do you like that? How secure are you feeling today? This really is about your estate planning and your investment portfolio, but it's an important question to ask because the IRA landscape has changed yet again because of Congress passing the SECURE Act, which stands for the Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement Act. We just call it the SECURE Act. So we're pleased to have our special guest with us today, Dave Eastman from Eastman Trust. He's going to explain a little bit about, actually a lot about the SECURE Act. And he's going to give you some very important tips for you to be aware of. And so a little bit about Dave. Dave was on the Sun Health Foundation Board of Trustees previously. There he is. There's the picture of Dave. And he's a member of the Wealth Council. And again, he was on our board and involved in several of our committees. He frequently speaks on these estate planning topics, and he's really expertise in this area. You know, I've spoken with some of the friends of Sun Health Foundation who've gone to attorneys for confirming some of their plans, and attorneys are great. I'm not disparaging any attorneys, but if you really want your estate planning to be spot on for your family, for your charities, for your tax ramification, it's important to go to an expert. And I would suggest Dave all the way around. So we're so fortunate to have him today to share a little bit about the SECURE Act. We also will have him later this fall. He'll do a webinar on estate planning that will go beyond the SECURE Act and the IRA information. So with that, I'm going to mute myself. Betsy, did you get the phone number so that you can dial in? I see we have a question in the chat room. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, great. All right, Dave, I'm going to mute me. And so we are sharing the host on this. So you're ready to go.
Great. Thanks, Gina. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me. And we're good to go. I always hold my breath when we do technology like this. So hopefully you can hear me and it's going well. Great to be with everybody this morning. Thank you, Gina, for that wonderful introduction. My main thing that's on my mind is how do I get a free cookie? And so if I need to start participating every month, that's if I get a cookie, it's worth it for sure.
I'll drop one off this afternoon.
Thanks. So today we're going to talk about the SECURE Act and how it might impact you. A couple of things to start off with. So a couple of assumptions before we jump into it. We're going to feed you through a fire hose this morning. So I'm going to give you a ton of information in a short amount of time. So if there's additional questions or follow-up questions, or we went too fast or whatnot, I apologize. I'm trying to give you as much as I can in the time that we have. But certainly you have access to my email, my phone number. You can call me, you can email me, you can come in for a free consultation and talk about it. Happy to do that for anybody that's on this call. So take advantage of that if you want to have additional questions or follow up on it. I do recognize some of the faces on our Zoom call today that are current clients of mine. So hello, everybody, and welcome to our Zoom call. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because it affects almost everybody that's out there. A couple of assumptions about everybody that's on this Zoom call today. Number one, I'm going to assume that everybody on this call has a retirement account of some kind, has an IRA, a Roth IRA, a 401k, something like that. That's the first assumption. The second assumption is I'm going to assume that everybody worked extremely hard for the money that you do have. Meaning we didn't win the lottery and get everything we have from winning the lottery. Aunt May didn't leave us the millions of dollars. We put a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of effort into accumulating this nest egg that we have. That's our second assumption. Our third assumption is that you do not want to list your favorite IRS agent as a beneficiary on your retirement accounts. And so if I looked at your retirement account beneficiary designations, I'm going to assume that I wouldn't see, please give the IRS 30% of my retirement account when I die. The fourth assumption is that most of us on this call are philanthropically minded in some way, shape, or form, whether that's to the tune of giving $10 to your church every single year, or $10,000, or $100,000. Everybody on this Zoom call is philanthropically minded in some way, shape, or form. So with those assumptions in mind, we're going to jump into the meat of our presentation today. And in order to get a good understanding of the Secure Act and how it impacts you, we have to jump in our time machine and go back in time to 1970. Now, that might conjure up some really good thoughts for some of you, and for others of you, you might cringe and say, oh, that was a terrible time in our life when the hippies and all that kind of fun stuff. But we're going to go back to the 70s. And the reason why we're going to go back to the 70s is because that's when ERISA law was passed. So President Ford at the time and Congress passed a law called ERISA law. And that was the start of the creation of these retirement accounts that we have today. And the impetus to create ERISA law back in the 70s was to incentivize Americans to save for retirement, right? We wanted Americans to start saving for the retirement so that when you retired, the American taxpayers weren't paying for your retirement. You had built up a nest egg to retire off of. And it worked great. As a matter of fact, to the tune of about $30 trillion is what Americans have socked in to these retirement accounts today. That's a lot of money that is stuck in these retirement accounts. $30 trillion is what we have about today. And so it affects, the Secure Act affects almost every single American. Like I say, almost every single one of us has some type of retirement account. And these are great financial planning vehicles, these retirement accounts are, because we dump money into these things, income tax deferred. They grow income tax deferred. We don't have to touch them until prior to Secure 70 and a half. And then we had to start taking money out of them. And so these accounts just kept growing and growing, and they were great financial planning tools. But back when Ford passed ERISA law, Congress, President Ford, never in their wildest dreams, never in their mind, would have imagined that 50 some odd years later, fast forward to today, that we would be doing what we're doing with these retirement accounts, which is we're not using them for the purpose that they were created for. We're not using them for our retirement necessarily. We're trying to use these retirement plans more as estate planning vehicles than retirement planning vehicles. Okay, so remember, ERISA was created so that we could pull money out of these things when we retired, so American taxpayers weren't paying for our retirement. But most of us aren't pulling money out of these retirement accounts at the rate that Congress and President Ford thought that we would be when we retired. And so what most of us are doing is we're saying, hey, great, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my $1 million IRA at Charles Schwab intact. I'm going to take my required minimum distribution every year after I turned 70 and a half prior to Secure, and pay tax on that RMD. And then I'm going to let that IRA continue to grow and grow and grow. And then when I die, I'm going to leave it to my son or my grandson or my great-grandson, who might have a life expectancy of another 80, 50, 40, 30 years. Well, you can see that if these things stay intact for another 40, 50, 60 years, the retirement account has the potential to continue to just grow and grow and grow, income tax deferred, which means Uncle Sam is not getting what? They're not getting their tax that they thought that they were going to get when they created these retirement accounts back in the 70s, because we're deferring that income tax as they continue to grow. So what we're going to do now, I'm more of a visual person. So if I can see something, I can understand it. So instead of listening to me talk, hopefully my handwriting's not the best. So I'm going to give you that up front. Hopefully you can make sense of what I write. I'll try to write as clear as possible, but law school pretty much ruined my handwriting for life. So we're going to pull up a whiteboard here. Hopefully it works. Does everybody see my whiteboard now on your screen? Raise your hand if you see my whiteboard. Okay, all right, I got a couple of hands, so I'm going to assume the rest of you see it. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through the basics of a retirement account. How does a retirement account work? Prior to Secure, we're going to talk then about what happened when Secure was passed, and then we're going to talk about some planning strategies that we might try to implement to mitigate the effects of the Secure Act that took place, okay? So let's start with the basics. And most of you know this because you have a retirement account, but this is a good refresher, right? We're trying to build on a good solid foundation. So we're going to lay the foundation of how a retirement account works. And with that said, I do want to leave time at the end for some questions. So I am going to end and leave about 15 minutes or so for questions. And that means even if I'm right in the middle of something that's really great and juicy, I may just say, hey, let's push this off to another maybe meeting, because I want to leave time for questions, okay? So how does a retirement account work? Well, let's use an example. Let's say we have an IRA, and let's say that IRA is worth $1 million. Okay, so we were really frugal. We put a lot of money into this. It's been growing great. Our financial advisor did a great job of making this money grow for us. And let's say that we are 73 years old, okay? Well, how do they calculate your RMD? How do they calculate how much you have to take from this $1 million IRA every single year? Some of you probably know this, but basically it's a simple math problem. What they do is they say, what is your life expectancy? So the IRS has life expectancy tables. They have a uniform life expectancy table and a single life expectancy table, depending on if you're married or you're single. And what they do is they look at that number. So they'll say, well, for a 73-year-old male, in my hypothetical, you have 10 years left to live, okay? So they'll take the million, which is the value of the retirement account as of December 31st of the year prior. Okay, so that's the value of our retirement account on December 31st of the year prior. And they divide that number by your life expectancy number. In our situation, in our hypothetical, it was 10 years. So $1 million divided by 10, it's early in the morning, I know, so our math might be a little bit rusty. But I think this is $100,000. I have that right, Elisa? Elisa's here to make sure my math is correct. So we have $100,000. This is what's called our RMD. And as you guys know, RMD stands for Required Minimum Distribution. That's the amount we have to take from our retirement account every single year after we turn 70.5. Prior to Secure changed that number to 72, but prior to Secure it was 70.5. Why 70.5? Why not 70? Why not 71? I have no idea. Ask your congressman. Sometimes I think they're smoking crack or something when they make these laws, but 70.5. So prior to Secure was 70.5, we had to take a required minimum distribution. Now, if you don't take that required minimum distribution, the IRS does not mess around. It's a 50% penalty on the RMD. So you do not want to miss taking your RMD. They will slap you. And that's in addition to the income tax that you're going to have to pay on the RMD. So it's 50%. Let's say you're in the 20% tax bracket. That's 70% of the RMD that's wiped out if you don't take your RMD. Big, big hit. So you got to take your RMD every year. Now, usually the financial institution that you're working with, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity, whoever you have your IRA with, is going to calculate this RMD for you, and you'll just sit back and you'll get a check every single month if that's how you set it up, or once a year if that's how you set it up, or every quarter if that's how you set it up. But that's how that will work. And then what the IRS says at the end of the year, if it's not a Roth IRA, so we're talking non-Roth IRAs, we're talking traditional IRAs. At the end of the year, when you report your taxes, you're going to tell your CPA, well, I took an RMD of $100,000. They're going to multiply that by your tax rate. Let's just say 30%. So 30% of $100,000 is how much? Lisa? 30,000, right? Is my math right? Okay. Oops. So $30,000 is going to your favorite charity, the IRS. The rest of the money goes into your account. You get to keep it, spend it, do whatever you want to do with it. Does that make sense so far? Just a nod of the head. So everybody's tracking. Okay. So perfect. Now, how it worked prior to Secure is that we would list as the beneficiary of this retirement account. Let's say we have 3 or 4 kids, okay? And we want to leave our $1 million IRA to our 4 children, okay? So on the beneficiary designation form with Charles Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity, whoever, we list our 4 children, child A, child B, child C, and child D as the beneficiary. Now, everyone on the Zoom call is going to be different. Some of you are single, some of you are widowed, some of you are married, some of you have kids, some of you don't have kids, some of you have kids, but you hate your kids and you don't want them to get anything. So everybody's going to be different, right? But basically, if this is how it works, okay? Assuming that we have 4 people, individuals that we love, whether they're kids or uncles, aunts, neighbors, nieces, whoever you have, okay? If we're married, this would be different. If we were married and it was first marriage, 99.9% of the time, you're going to list your spouse as the primary beneficiary on the retirement account. That's the best thing tax-wise. They can roll over the retirement account. That's something that no other beneficiary gets to do. Kids cannot roll over your retirement account. They get what's called an inherited IRA, which is different than a rollover. It's treated differently tax-wise. So if it's your first marriage, been married for 50 years, joint kids, no separate kids, your primary beneficiary 99% of the time on your retirement account is going to be your spouse. I say this because probably the number one question I get, at least on a weekly basis, is, Dave, we created our trust with you. Should the beneficiary of our retirement account be our trust? Well, if you're married, no. If you're married, we want the primary beneficiary to be your spouse because we get all these great tax advantages if the spouse rolls it over. If you're single, if the trust is drafted right, and has the right language in it, then we can make the trust the primary beneficiary, okay? In my hypothetical, I'm going to say that you've listed these 4 children as the primary beneficiary on your retirement account because you're single, okay? Now, how it worked prior to Secure was when I, the owner of the IRA, died, prior to Secure. These kids would get what's called an inherited IRA. So the IRA, the $1 million IRA, would be broken into 4 new inherited IRAs for each of the kids. Now, once again, we're going to do some math. 1 million divided by 4 is 250, I think, right? Okay, so far I'm 100% on my math. I get a gold star. So 250 for each of these guys down here, okay? Now, prior to Secure, and this was great, this was amazing law. What happened when these guys got their 250 of an inherited IRA is they were able to stretch, that's a term that we used to use. They were able to stretch the IRA for the remainder of their individual life expectancy, which is amazing, right? So let's say this kid when I die, this kid is 40 years old. This kid is 35 years old. This kid is 30 years old. And this kid is 20 years old. Okay. A life expectancy, if we looked at the life expectancy table that the IRS has for, say, the 20-year-old, a 20-year-old is going to have a 60-year life expectancy or more. That means this $250,000 can stay in the form of an IRA, deferring the income taxes for another 60 years. What happens if we defer income taxes on $250,000 for 60 years? What do we think happens to the IRA? It's going to grow. It's going to get bigger, right? Which is awesome, which is what most Americans were doing with the $30 trillion of retirement accounts. They were doing this. They were leaving it to their kids or grandkids who had a much longer life expectancy. And then the IRA just kept on growing and growing. And all that the only thing the kid had to do every year is they had to take an RMD, right, on the inherited IRA. Well, what's an RMD on a 60-year life expectancy? 250 divided by 60, that's a very small RMD, right? It's a very tiny little bit amount that we have to pull out. The rest of it stays intact and it continues to grow income tax deferred, which is awesome. It's amazing. It's wonderful. This was a great estate planning vehicle. And millions of Americans were using it as an estate planning vehicle to pass on trillions of dollars to the next generation, income tax deferred. Does this make sense so far? Any questions on this part? You can type in your questions. I think that's probably the best way. Let's see. Nope, no questions. Okay. We'll have Elisa continue to monitor it. And of course, Gina or her team can pop on anytime and say, Dave, looks like we have a question. But this is the foundation that we're working off of. This is what the law was prior to Secure. This is how it used to work. We had a large IRA. We have to take RMDs from it after we're 70 and a half. We pay income tax on the RMD. When we die, we leave it to our children. They get to stretch it out over their life expectancy, which potentially could be another 40, 50, 60 some odd years, which was great. Well, guess what happened? Congress finally figured out what was going on. And they said, stop, time out. This was not the reason why we created these things back in the 70s. We thought Americans would dump $1 million into their retirement account. We thought when they turned 70 and a half, they were going to accelerate the distributions from these, not just take your required minimum distribution. We thought you were going to need to use most of that to live off of, but you don't. Matter of fact, some of you don't even want your RMD. You don't even want to take it. It's a burden for you to take it. You don't need it to live off of. You have other income coming in from other investments and Social Security and whatnot. And to you, this is a burden. It's a tax burden you don't want to have. I'm going to divert here for just a minute and we're going to come back. So what happens if you're taking this RMD every year and you don't want to take it? You don't need to take it. Or maybe you don't need to take all of it. You only need a portion of it. Do we have to take all of this out and pay our favorite charity 30%? No. I know you're saying, Dave, you just said I have to take it. Otherwise, it's a 50% penalty. Now you're saying I don't have to take it. I'm confused. What you can do with your RMDs, matter of fact, I just had this situation happen with clients. They came in 2 days ago, very similar to this fact pattern here that I've written up on the board, close to $1 million worth of IRAs combined. They've got about 4 IRAs, but the total combined is about $1 million. And they're taking about $100,000 every year, but they don't need it. And they're like, Dave, we hate paying tax on this. And the next question I ask them is, are you philanthropically minded? Do you make charitable donations every single year? Yes, we do. We make charitable donations every year. How do you make those charitable donations every year? Well, we take our RMD, we put the RMD into our bank account, right? It comes down here into our checking account. And then after it comes into our checking account, we write a check to our favorite charities every year. Is that good planning? Everyone should be shaking their head saying, no, that's bad planning. The reason why is because when you take the RMD and it comes to you personally down here and it goes into your checking account, guess what? That is taxed, right? Now the IRS is going to take their tax on that. And then you're distributing it out to charity A, B, and C after you've already paid the tax, which is bad planning. Now, a couple of other assumptions here. I'm going to assume that most of us on this Zoom call, because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017 by President Trump, you are now taking the standard deduction. You are no longer itemizing your deductions. And the reason why you're now taking the standard deduction for most of you is because they've increased the standard deduction so much. As a matter of fact, very few Americans are itemizing their deductions anymore because Trump increased the standard deduction so much. Well, if you're not itemizing your deductions, when you make these charitable donations down here, you're no longer getting a charitable deduction. See how you're losing that? Because you're taking the standard deduction. You only get a charitable deduction if you itemize your deductions. And so you're not even getting a charitable deduction by doing it this way. You're paying the income tax on your RMD, you're making a distribution to your favorite charities, and you're not even getting the advantage of getting a charitable deduction anymore. That's bad planning. And most of us are doing this example because we don't understand how we can avoid it. How could we avoid this? Well, what we do is we take us out of the equation. Doesn't stop. The RMD doesn't stop with us, right? There's no stop here. The RMD goes directly now to who? Our beneficiaries. If the RMD goes directly from Charles Schwab, Fidelity to Charity A, Charity B, Charity C, that's called a qualified charitable deduction. And that means our favorite charity, the IRS, gets how much? 0. And do we have to declare the RMD as income? No. So that doesn't show up on our income tax return, which is awesome. It's amazing. It's fantastic. It's the best thing that you can do. So, and do you have to do all of it? No. You can say, I want 10% of my RMD to go to our favorite charity. Sun Health, Make-A-Wish, Habitat for Humanity. Do we have to do a certain percentage? No, you can do whatever percentage you want. But that gets it out of being subject to income tax for you. So that's the way you guys should be doing your charitable donations every year. If you're already philanthropically minded, if you're already giving to your favorite charity every single year, do it from your RMD. You have to take it anyway. Why not avoid paying tax on it and then making the distribution? Have it go directly to your charity. How do you do that? You contact your IRA holder and you say, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, we want a percentage of our RMD now to go directly to our favorite charities. And here are our charities we want you to send that to. Doesn't stop at me. The RMD does not come to me. It cannot come to me. If it comes to me, tax. If it misses me, goes to them directly, not included in my income for income tax purposes. Now, a little bit of in the weeds here. When your CPA files your income taxes for the next year, after this happens, after you've done your qualified charitable distribution, they're going to show you took the full 100,000 as an RMD out. So it's going to still show up on your 1040 as you took the full RMD, the full 100,000. So we don't get hit with the 50% penalty. But they're going to put a little note on your 1040 that says you didn't get the full 100. You only got whatever, 20%, 10%, whatever amount you want to get. And that's the amount that they're going to include in income taxes. The rest of it, they're not going to include for income tax purposes. So we went on a little tangent there, but this is important because most of us don't understand this, and it's great tax planning to do it this way. Okay. On top of that, the Secure Act did affect these QCDs a little bit, so I'm not too off of topic here when we're talking about secure. Because the Secure Act said we don't have to start taking RMDs anymore until we're now 72 years old. So it went from 70 and a half to 72. But it didn't change the QCD law. So to do a qualified charitable distribution, you still only have to be 70 and a half. You don't have to be 72 to do a QCD. So Secure did not increase this age. It kept it at 70 and a half to do a QCD. So it does tie into the Secure Act in a way, okay? Does this make sense a little bit? Kind of? Please raise your hand if it makes a little bit of sense. Okay, all right. So that's a QCD, great planning tool if you're already making charitable donations. Now, Secure. So remember back over here on our whiteboard where we were talking about our RMD and stretching it out over our kids' life expectancies after we die. And Congress in 2019, in December of 2019, finally comes along and they're like, wait a second. You're telling me that there's $30 trillion sitting in retirement accounts that these people aren't taking out and we're not getting our tax on it? How is that possible? Well, we're going to ruin that for people. We're going to destroy that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pass, I don't know if I should erase or I should just maybe move my board. I'm going to try to move my board. Maybe I'll just erase. That way I don't screw anything up. Hopefully you've committed this to memory. It's really great. If you want to take a picture of it, now would be the time. All right, I'm going to erase this. Uh-oh. I'm going to erase this.
Hey, Dave, while you're erasing, could I ask a question? This is Gina.
Yeah.
So you're talking about traditional IRAs only right now. Does the same, what you're talking about, apply to Roth IRAs?
So a Roth IRA, the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA, the only difference is the taxes, right? We don't have to pay income tax on a Roth IRA. So every dollar that goes into an IRA, a Roth IRA, it's already been taxed. We've already paid tax on that Roth. And then it grows inside the Roth IRA, income tax free. And when we pull it out, or our kids pull it out, we pay zero income tax, okay? So, and a Roth, we don't have to take it out after we're 70 and a half and some of those things. So Roths are treated a little bit differently. Roths are great estate planning vehicles and financial planning vehicles because you've already paid the income tax on it. So they're a little bit different, okay? Good question.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, so let's talk about Secure, okay? So 2019, December of 2019 comes around and President Trump enacts Secure. And as Gina already said, Secure is just an acronym like everything else in the government. It stands for setting every community up for retirement enhancement, okay? So did it really set every community up for retirement enhancement? In my opinion, no. And the reason why they passed this law was because they're trying to raise revenue, like everything else in the government. They're trying to raise revenue. And they figure if we can pass this Secure Act that minimizes the ability to stretch out retirement accounts when death occurs, then we can raise more revenue in the government to cover some of the things that Trump wanted to do. Most people in my field estimate that the Secure Act is not going to raise as much revenue as what people think it's going to. So with that in mind, what did the Secure Act do? How did it change the playing field for us? Well, number one, as we said, is it took our required beginning date, and RBD, required beginning date. It took that required beginning date from 70 and a half to age 72, which means we don't have to start drawing from our retirement accounts now until we're 72. Prior to Secure, we had to start drawing from it at 70 and a half. Otherwise, there's a 50% penalty. So does that mean everybody gets to wait until they're 72? No, it means if you were 70 and a half prior to January 1st of 2020, you're still under the old rule of 70 and a half, right? You don't get to wait till you're 72 before you start taking your RMD. So the law was passed end of December, it became effective 1/1/20. That's when it became effective, which means if you turned 70 and a half after January 1st, 2020, you're then subjected to the Secure Act, which means you get to wait now until you're 72 before you have to start taking your RMD, okay? That's number one, which is a good thing, which means that we get to continue to defer the income taxes for another couple of years on this, okay? The second thing that they did is they said you can now continue to work and contribute to your retirement account after you're age 72. Prior to the Secure Act, once you were 70 and a half, you could no longer contribute to your retirement account, right? They capped it out. They said, nope, sorry, you can't contribute to your IRA. Now they've said, after, if you want to work at Walmart as a greeter and get a little bit of extra money every single year, and you want to dump that money into your IRA, then that's fine. You can continue to contribute to your IRA even after you're 72, that's great as well. Okay. So there were some good things. Now, to start with, we've got about 5 minutes, so we're going to finish this up and we can do it. Then we can leave time for questions. So to start with, the Secure Act, everybody that's on this call that's an owner of an IRA, it's not going to affect you while you're alive. It has nothing to do with while you're alive, except for some good advantages. You can continue to contribute to your IRA. You can wait till you're 72 if you turn 70 and a half after this date. So you're not going to see the effects of it while you're alive. The big impact of the Secure Act is it wiped out that stretch. That stretch when we die, when we, the owner of the IRA, dies, and we left it to our 4 children, and they were able to stretch the IRA out over the remainder of their life expectancy, another 40, 50, 60 years, deferring the income taxes. That's what the Secure Act put the kibosh on. No more, can't do that. So that's the real impact of the Secure Act, is losing the stretch IRA after you die. Now, they've made some exceptions to that rule of getting rid of the stretch, right? There's 5 exceptions. So these are the 5 people that can still get a stretch on a retirement account after you, the owner, dies. A spouse, right? So if I leave my $1 million IRA to my wife and I die, and my wife rolls my IRA over to her, she can continue to stretch out her IRA for the remainder of her life expectancy. Right? She's not under this new rule of 10 years, is what the Secure Act did. That's one exception, a spouse. Second exception is a minor child of yours, not your minor grandchildren, not a minor grandniece or nephew. It's got to be your minor child. Now, what is a minor? In Arizona, a minor is anybody under the age of 18. Once they turn 18, they're no longer a minor. Now they're under the 10-year rule to distribute it all. Okay, so that's a minor child of yours. That's an exception. And that's kind of a little bit of there's a little caveat to that, because once they turn 18, then it triggers the Secure Act 10-year rule. So if I leave it to my 5-year-old daughter, once she turns 18, she now has 10 years to take it out. So it's really 28, she'll have to have all the IRA out. So that's the minor child rule. Third exception is a chronically ill person. Fourth is a disabled person. Those are defined by statute. Basically, if you can't feed yourself, bathe yourself, transport yourself from point A to point B, then you would be a person that fits within that category. And you can leave an IRA to one of those people, and they can continue to stretch it out over their life expectancy. They're not under the 10-year rule. And then the fifth and final exception is somebody that's less than 10 years younger than you, right? So if I leave, let's say I'm 73 years old, and I leave my IRA to my brother who is 65 years old. That my brother is less than 10 years younger than me. Therefore, I can leave my IRA to him, and he can stretch it out for the remainder of his life expectancy. Now, why did they do that? Why did they make it so you can leave it to somebody less than 10 years younger than you? Well, because most of you are mature, right? And if you're 73 and you leave it to a 65-year-old, It's the same math, basically, right? We're still having to accelerate the distribution because the RMD is basically the same amount. So they're okay with that. So that's why they did that. So those are your 5 exceptions. Everybody else that doesn't fit within one of those 5 exceptions, you now have to withdraw the IRA within 10 years. No 40 years, no 50 years, no 60 years. All the IRA has to come out within 10 years. Okay. So going back to my hypothetical real quick. $1 million IRA. I have it. It's at Charles Schwab. I die. I've listed my 4 kids as the beneficiaries on my IRA. Age of each of them is the same age as I did before, 45, 40, 35, whatever I did. Now when I die, every penny of that $250,000 that I left to each of them, remember I had A, B, C, and D, and I had the $250 for each, remember before? And I had the life, I had their, their age, 45, 40, 35, and 20. Well, now we don't care what their age is. It doesn't matter anymore. If they're not one of the 5 exceptions, every one of these kids is going to have to withdraw every penny of that within 10 years. Okay. So very, very important. 10 years. Now, what does that do? Well, number one is it makes it so that we're increasing our children's tax burden, right? Every year they're going to have to withdraw a chunk of this retirement account. Most of our kids are probably still in their working years. So they're at the highest income tax bracket, or could be at one of the highest income tax brackets. And also realize that today our highest income tax bracket is 37%. Biden has been talking about increasing that to 39%. So these income tax brackets, they go up depending on who's president, and they go down. But because of what's happened with COVID and the CARES Act and the trillions of dollars that we've had to do to keep the country running and going, what is your bet? Are we going up or are we going down? My bet is we're going up in tax rates, okay? So if we think we're going to be going up in tax rates, when we die, the owner of the IRA, if we're 83 years old and we think we're going to be dead in the next few years, and we have a kid that's 55 years old, when that kid receives that, more likely than not, they're going to be paying more income taxes 5 years from now, 4 years from now, 3 years from now than we are today, because the tax rates are going to go up, and because this kid is still working, which means they have income coming in that increases their income tax burden. So that wipes out that retirement account pretty quick, okay? So that's the effect of the Secure Act. Real quick, what are some things we can do to mitigate this? What are some options for us? And then we'll open it up for questions. Number one, if we know or think or bet the tax rates are going to go one way, up, right? And we are right now retired, and our income tax rate is 25%. We're paying 25 cents on every dollar, right? That's our Social Security, our RMD, whatever income we have coming in. And we think that when we die, our kids are going to be paying 35 cents on every dollar because the tax rates are going to go up and because our kids are working and so they have more income coming in. If we want to save on that difference, the 10 cents of difference here, if we want to save on that, what can we do? We can accelerate the distribution from our IRAs, right? I'd rather pay 25 cents on the dollar today than 35 cents on the dollar tomorrow. Make sense? So you can accelerate the distribution of your IRAs if you need the IRA and you're going to use it. That's option one. Option two, do a Roth conversion. Sit down with your financial advisor. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a lawyer. My job is to figure out the taxes and estate planning and stuff. Your financial advisor's job is to figure out, is a Roth conversion the best thing for you? And they'll crunch the numbers and look at it and see if you have other means to pay the tax that you're going to have to pay when you do the Roth conversion. But once again, it goes back to, would we rather pay 25 cents on the dollar in a Roth conversion today, as opposed to our kids paying 35 cents on the dollar when we die, and they're in an accelerated distribution rate of 10 years? That's option number two, do a Roth conversion today. Option number three is if you want to replace the lost income, right? Because we know our kids are not going to get as much of the IRA because they're paying more tax. Then maybe we replace that with a life insurance policy if we can afford it. That's another way to make up the lost income from the IRA. The next way is if you're philanthropically minded, right? If you're charitably inclined, the best asset, bar none, easy cheesy to leave to a charity is the retirement account, right? Because a charity pays 0 in tax. They get the full dollar. There's no 25% going to IRS or 35% going to IRS. We leave the IRA to our charity if we're philanthropically minded. And then the rest of our estate, right? Our stocks, our bonds, our mutual funds, our house, our real estate, our cars, we leave that to our kids. We leave that to our loved ones because there's no accelerated distribution on those things. And we can minimize the taxation of those things because of a step up in cost basis on most of that when death occurs under current law. So hopefully that helps. I know it's a little bit of a mess. I promise to leave time for questions. So any questions on this? I know I fed you through a fire hose. It's a lot of information. Hopefully it wasn't too technical. We didn't get too far into the weeds, but did this help?
Dave, this was great. And so we're going to scroll through the screen here. If anybody has a question, wave your hand and Claudia or Joyce will unmute you so that you can share your question with the entire group and everybody can learn from that. Dave, I think you did a great job. You hit the key points about one of the first things to do is check your beneficiaries. You really look at your documents and check your beneficiaries and take into consideration what Dave was telling you as it relates to kids inheriting, you know, the non-spouse inheriting and the exceptions to that, but then other ways to help your kids from having such a tax burden. So I'd love to hear questions, invite questions from anybody who might have one. Ron Larson. Okay, we'll unmute you so that you can ask the question, Ron. And by the way, Ron is also, he's has a law office in Sun City. He's been a very good friend to Sun Health Foundation. So Ron, I know that you're asking on behalf of your clients and yourself, so you're unmuted.
Thank you, Gina, and thank you for the nice presentation. Are you using charitable remainder trusts wherein at the taxpayer's demise, the IRA or portion of the IRA goes to a charitable remainder trust with the income or a unit trust amount to the children, followed by it going to the charity as a remainder?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for asking that question, Ron. So one of the ways we talked about mitigating the effect of the Secure Act was to, if you're philanthropically minded, to leave it to charity. And one of the ways we can leave it to charity is through a charitable remainder trust, right? So that's just another way to satisfy our philanthropic desires, is to leave it to a charitable remainder trust. And as Ron said, it's a great way to do that because if we leave it to a charitable remainder trust, our kids still get the income off of that for the remainder of their lifetime. And then what's left in that charitable remainder trust will end up going to our favorite charities that we have. So it's a great point and a great way to mitigate some of the taxation of this when we die. Another way to do that is you could set up a donor advised fund and make the donor advised fund the beneficiary of the charitable remainder trust or of the retirement account itself. And the donor advised fund, what it basically is it's set up so you can control who the charitable beneficiaries of the donor advised fund are. So there's lots of options there with that. If you're philanthropically minded, once again, kind of the world opens up a lot more as far as options go for you in order to minimize this tax. If you're not philanthropically minded, not as much philanthropically minded, it just means we take some options off the table for you. But charitable remainder trust is a great vehicle to use to do some of that. Good point. Any other questions?
Okay, well, feel free to, if any of you have questions, I think we have a slide that has Dave's contact information. You can, call him or email him. He's kind of a busy guy, but he does get back to you. So, or if you want to route a question through us that we can share with Dave, he's really just a wealth of knowledge and can offer some great guidance on all of this. So, Dave, thank you so much. You did a great job today. And every time I hear you talk about this, I learn so much more. So I really appreciate the free education you've given me. Appreciate that, Dave. Thanks so much.
Great talk. Thank you very much.
Just a couple of dates I'd like you to keep in mind. We are doing a walk for women's health on September the 26th. That will benefit the health and well-being in our community. If you'd like to sign up for a walk or a run and join us, that will be a lot of fun. We have our Heroes with Heart Gala on Saturday, November the 6th. It will be at the Renaissance Glendale Hotel and Spa in Glendale. We're pleased to be able to come back together for a gala. It will be a lot of fun. So you can RSVP to Janine McGee here at Sun Health, and I think you have that contact information. We also have our dates for our upcoming Coffees with Gina and Friends on August the 16th. We will be hearing from Dr. Flanagan of the Core Institute talking about pain management. There's, I think we all have some ortho pain or other kinds of pain. She's amazing, and you'll enjoy hearing from her. On September the 30th, we'll be hearing from Dr. Hana Musa to discuss diabetes and prevention and how to manage your diabetic issues with that. We would love to hear back from all of you as we set up these Coffees with Gina and Friends. We have some thoughts about, we have a contact with somebody who helps us get organized. She has great tips and takeaways on how to organize things. And we probably will be doing something around that right before the holidays so that you can make room for more gifts for the holiday season. So she'll help us get organized. And we have a few other topics coming up that seem to be of interest to everybody. So with that, I want to be respectful of your time and just thank you again for your support, for your interest, for staying connected with Sun Health. So please stay well. Please stay safe and stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you all very soon. Bye-bye.